everyone. Welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, November 18th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We got to start talking about that game that happened down there in Athens, Georgia this past weekend. Georgia gets a huge win over Tennessee, 31-17. Definitely one that they badly needed and puts them in a really good spot for the CFP. Then we'll get into Oregon and Texas. Oregon and Texas kind of survive a little bit of a road test from Wisconsin and Arkansas, respectively. Two games that are a little bit different, but definitely some where they needed that win if they wanted to stay in the fight. Then we got some big conference wins from South Carolina, Clemson, and Arizona State, all that could keep them in the CFP race, but also could be a little bit hard for them to make up the ground that they've lost throughout the season. Then we'll get to upsets all over the place. We had BYU fall, we had Florida's big-time moment in the sun when they beat LSU, then we had New Mexico and Stanford get some big-time wins that at least cleared up some things in the CFP race, and then we'll finish it off talking about all the other ranked teams, including and then one more big game from the Big 12 this past weekend. Definitely want to do a little bit of a whip around before we end here. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat at the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page. Click on that $sign, add any question, comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so utilize that. Also, GSMCpodcast.net is still up and working and works the exact same way, so utilize either of those if you'd like. But let's jump into the big game of this past weekend. Georgia gets a big-time win over Tennessee at home this past weekend, and this was a massive performance in so many different ways. It got the confidence back for a Georgia team that had lost it in the last couple of weeks, particularly last week at Ole Miss. They got torn apart, really, for much of that game, particularly the offensive line. They came back today and played their best game of the entire year. I mean, that Texas game was incredible. The offense didn't necessarily show up the way you wanted it to. This was the most complete, most together game that I think Georgia's played all year, and it really came down to the offensive and defensive line. The offensive line did an incredible job. Huge shout out to Monroe Freeling, who jumped in for Ernest Green, who was injured this week, and handled business incredibly well. But the story was obviously Carson Beck. He was absolutely incredible in this game. It was the Carson Beck that we had expected to see for pretty much the entirety of the year, but he finally showed up yesterday. He went over 300 yards total. He had two passing touchdowns, one rushing. The one rushing was the one that put him ahead for the rest of the game. And the Tennessee defense hadn't allowed more than 20 points all season. And the Georgia offense wasn't necessarily perfect, but they had a success rate at a rate that was just not anywhere close to what other teams had done against Tennessee. So Tennessee opened this game on a 10-0 lead, and really at the end of the first quarter kind of felt like that Ole Miss game in some ways. It really felt like Georgia might just not have it today. That defense for Tennessee might just be a little bit too much for them. The drops were coming in early for Georgia, but then from that way forward, it was Georgia's game. They were absolutely dominant, and the tight ends really were a big part of that for really the first time this year. They've had different moments here and there. Lawson Lucky has been a part of the offense at times, but overall, hasn't necessarily been the production from that group that they usually get at Georgia. Well, Oscar Delp, Ben Urasek, and Lawson Lucky really picked up the slack. 10 catches, 132 yards, 2 scores to Oscar Delp early in that game, and definitely huge for this offense. When you can get those tight ends involved, it takes a little bit off these receivers that aren't quite as talented as you're used to at Georgia, so definitely a lot that you're going to have to put on them down the stretch, and they were able to answer the bell in this one. So huge for this one, and then the run game was not elite for Georgia by any means. It was not necessarily the way that it usually is there, and it's kind of been that way all season. But especially with Trevor Etienne out, it was a little bit of tough sledding at times. That being said, I think they got plenty from Nate Frazier, from Chauncey Bowens, and most importantly, really, from Carson Beck. It was really incredible to watch him kind of take that initiative, I suppose, take that spot as, he's got to make some plays with his legs. We saw the run very early in the second quarter. That felt like the moment. It felt like the moment where that game changed, maybe the entire season changed for Georgia, where Carson Beck runs, picks up the first down, gives a little bit of a hit to a DB on Tennessee, and everything kind of comes together for Georgia. And from that moment forward, they were absolutely dominant. They were really, really incredible in this game. And I think for Tennessee, you talk about this team, and they have so many things to like, right? They have a defense that is one of the best, maybe the best in the entire country. Dylan Sampson, again, one of the best, if not the best running back in the entire country. So you have a lot of things that you like in this game, and there are a lot of things in this game that I thought Nico played really well. I don't think he played bad football. He did have a fumble to finish, but made a number of great throws, did plenty, in my opinion, for Tennessee to be able to win this game. a couple of drops, a couple of misses, different things that have been kind of popping up throughout the year. But overall, I think he played a really good game, and I think he probably did everything you could have asked of him on the road in a really hostile environment to handle all of that. I think it was really impressive from Nico. But overall, obviously not the performance that Tennessee wanted by any means. I think this team for Georgia, they came out angry. They heard all the noise. It was kind of like that Texas game. It felt like they had heard all the noise. They've been taking in all of the disrespect. They've been hearing about how Tennessee is going to come in and bury them, and they're going to, fade off as a program in the SEC, and they took all of that. They were absolutely dominant in the back three quarters of this game, and if that's the team you're getting going forward, they can win a national title. As upsetting as that might sound for a lot of people out there, they absolutely can. But I do think we learned a couple of things about Tennessee in this game. I think the biggest one for me is if that pass rush is not getting home, if they're not able to have the effect that they usually can have, this pass defense can be had. It's not necessarily a bad pass defense or one that's going to get absolutely torn to pieces every single time they play, but that pass rush has a huge amount to do with how good they have been against the pass. So definitely something to watch as you move forward. If offensive lines are able to hold up against them, are they able to push the ball downfield the way they want to? And we'll find that out in time, but this was the game that Georgia's been waiting for in a lot of different ways. You were at home, a great win at night in front of your fan base that was on fire on Saturday, and it was at times it was led by the offense, which is kind of the biggest thing here, where you've had a team that if the defense wasn't going to play incredible football, which they did in this one, but they didn't necessarily have to. They could have given up 30 points and still been able to win this game. So I think it's a lot of confidence going forward to feel like the offense can pick up their slack. And the defense, when they're not, they absolutely can win games for you like they did in Austin earlier this year. So I think it's one of those things where Georgia got the win that they very badly needed. For Tennessee, it creates some questions around the CFP that we will get into throughout the week. But definitely a win that they very badly wanted. Now, a lot of things are kind of up in the air and out of their control when it comes to the CFP. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But how Georgia was able to get the win, I think Carson Beck's arrival is obviously the biggest part of this. 25 for 40, 347, 2 touchdowns and 0 interceptions through the air. Also had 32 yards rushing in the score that put him up for good. So he did everything. He was everything that they wanted him to be. He was everything that NFL scouts and fans and the coaches thought he was going to be coming into this year. Maybe that's the game. Maybe that's the game that sparks this really, really talented player and a guy that absolutely can lead a team to a national title. He just needed that game. I think he just needed that confidence booster, that one game that puts him over the top. Now you got UMass and Georgia Tech over the next couple of weeks. Those can be confidence builders. As you head into the playoff, as you head into the postseason, those can be confidence builders where Carson Beck is looking at the postseason and saying, I'm playing the best football I've played at Georgia, and I'm going to go tear people to pieces. He still has that in him. I still believe that there's one of the better quarterbacks in the country. I still believe that he has all the ability in the world to win them a national title. He's got to keep playing this way. Obviously, that's been one of the big issues is the consistency of his play, but this was a huge arrival for him, and it could be that this is just the Carson Beck that we get going forward. The other part of it was the line of scrimmage domination. I mean, Georgia had 5 sacks, 6 tackles for loss. They allowed 0 sacks and 2 tackles for loss. They were dominant, and when you win the line of scrimmage that decisively, especially in the SEC, you are going to win. It was a huge, huge bounce back, particularly for that offensive line that had a couple of guys go out. I mean, you had Ernest Green go out, Monroe Freeland came into the mix. You had Micah Morris kind of be on uneven footing in this game, a little bit questionable coming in. I don't think he ended up getting any snaps, but I could be wrong about that. Maybe he got him from time to time. But Tate Ratledge picked up the slack. You did a lot of different things that you really hadn't been able to do all year. Now, the run blocking is still a little bit of an issue. The run game in general is still something that's not quite where you want it to be. But I think if you're getting that from the run game, if that's what you're getting, especially without Trevor Etienne, if that's what you're getting, I think you can live with that. It's not perfect by any means, but the reality is the run game for Georgia is not going to be perfect this year. It's not quite to the level that you're normally used to having it, so it's going to be a battle one way or the other, but But when you have the line of scrimmage domination that they did, you're going to win a lot of games, especially in the SEC. But finally, Tennessee really did hurt themselves in this game a lot of different ways. They had 9 penalties for 70 yards. officiating was questionable at a number of different places, but at the end of the day, it's been questionable all year, all around the country. So I'm not necessarily going to talk about it too much here, but they had multiple big-time drops, including one from Dante Thornton that really hurt. They had a couple of missed assignments and missed opportunities, one on a punt return. Boo Carter, they were up 7 points. They could have gone up 14, really put this team to bed pretty early on. And Brett Thorson makes a crazy play to tackle him, put him down, and they force a field goal on that play, come back down, score, and the game goes the way that you expected it to go, or the way that it went the rest of the way. So a lot of plays that just needed to be made, a lot of those 50-50 plays that decide a lot of these games in the SEC were just made by Georgia on Saturday, plain and simple. But where do they go from here? I think for Tennessee, all you can do is handle your business. I don't think this should knock them out. I will say that really until Selection Sunday. I think if Indiana were to lose by 17 points next week, this Tennessee team should get in above them. If Notre Dame loses again, or if Penn State loses again, or anything else happens, if there's a number of other things that happen, I think Tennessee should get in. Now, there's still a big-time question. You still have Bama, Ole Miss, Texas, UGA, Texas A&M. I'm losing track of all the teams, but you have all those teams to deal with down the stretch. So it'll be interesting to see how it all pans out. I think Tennessee would be that fifth team, hypothetically. I don't know how far back they would be. It would be really interesting to watch. Now, does Tennessee get in if Bama loses to Texas or Texas A&M in the championship? Or if Texas or Texas A&M loses to Bama in the championship? Because then Texas would have 2 losses, but Tennessee would have the better resume. Or A&M would have 3 losses, or Bama would have 3 losses. It's going to be a battle. I don't think they should knock them out. This is a very good team, and they went on the road, didn't play their best football, and still only got beat by 4. I think this is a very impressive team. I think they're one of the 12 best teams in the country. I think the season will end that way. Whether or not they get in is still very much up for debate. For Georgia, if they win a title, that was the game. That was the game that everyone in this fan base is going to point back to and say that's when it all started. They need some consistency. They need to be able to show that throughout the rest of the year. I mean, it's UMass and Georgia Tech, so if they don't show that, then we got some problems. But you win those 2 games, you're in. There's no two ways about that. You've played the toughest schedule in the country. You've gotten 2 huge wins against Texas and Tennessee. You're going to get in, no doubt about that. So win the rest of the way, which you very much should do, and you are in. So feel pretty good that Georgia's going to be in that field. For Tennessee, I think the questions are going to be answered over the next couple of weeks. They handle business. They get a couple of help just here and there. Maybe Notre Dame loses this upcoming weekend. Maybe Penn State loses again. Maybe Indiana gets drugged this upcoming weekend. I think they can get in, but still some questions, and maybe some of it is just out of their hands entirely. But we'll definitely keep you updated as we go throughout that, and we'll take our first break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Oregon and Texas, 2 teams that went on the road and survived, at the very least. They survived and stayed in the CFP race and stayed in their conference races in a lot of different ways. But we'll talk about it right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the huge game that went on in Athens, Georgia this past weekend. Georgia does get a huge win, likely punches their ticket to the CFP, barring any disaster. Tennessee, a little bit up in the air. Definitely some things that will have to do nothing with them. As long as they handle business, they're in as good a spot as they can be, and then might need a little bit of help here and there to get in, which I don't think they should, but that's a totally side point that we can get in throughout the week. But let's get into Oregon and Texas because they survived. As a number of other teams went down, Texas and Oregon were able to eke out some wins on the road. And we'll start with that Oregon game because this one was sketchy. And it felt like for a little bit in that second half, it really did feel like Oregon might actually fall. They might lose one, and then Big Ten would be a little bit more up in the air as you head into the final weekend. But they got away with one, no doubt about that. They gave Wisconsin a number of chances, including a really ridiculous decision to do a fake field goal at the very end. If you're going to go for it, put it in your best player's hands and Dylan Gabriel and call it a day. But at the end of the day, they were able to get away with one. They were able to get the pick and end it there. But the defense for Oregon was incredible in this game. It's been really, really good all year, but especially in this game, it just outright won it for them. But in my opinion, I think this was a big game for Wisconsin. Obviously, it wasn't the way that you wanted it to go by any means, but I think when you look at this game down the road, when you look at this game maybe next year or the year after that, I think you're going to see this game as a reason why Luke Fickell is still the right guy there. I know this season has not gone the way you wanted it to by any means. You've not gotten the wins that you wanted it to. You kind of have beaten everyone you're supposed to. You've lost to everyone that you're meant to. That's frustrating. It definitely can be, especially in the second year of a coach that you feel like is going to turn things around. This is proof that everything is still moving in the right direction. It might be moving a little bit slower than people want it to, but it feels like this program, this team is still moving in the right direction. They got a lot of things they need to figure out over the next couple of years, especially getting a big-time portal quarterback in this offseason. But at the end of the day, it feels like a program that's building. It still feels like a program that's heading in the right direction. Going to need a big-time moment. They're going to need a big-time win over the next, maybe the rest of this year into next year. But I don't know. I think Wisconsin got out of this game. Obviously didn't get the win that they wanted. I think they got plenty, especially this fan base knowing that this program, at the very least, is still heading in the right direction. Just a little bit slower than they might want it to. But for Oregon, they dominated the fourth quarter, and that's what championship teams do in a lot of different ways. They outscored them 10-0 in the fourth quarter. Wisconsin's offensive possessions in the fourth quarter went punt, turnover on downs, and interception for a grand total of 0 yards. It was absolute domination from the Oregon defense in that fourth quarter, and that was really important for Oregon in a number of different ways. They have 8 straight weeks of playing. They've been on the road 3 of the last 5 weeks at night at Camp Randall. Getting a win, even by 1 point, even by 3 points, is plenty. It was really ugly, but they got it done, and they move on the rest of the way. But this is a really remarkable performance from the Wisconsin defense as well, especially the back end deserves a lot of respect. Only 7 yards per attempt for Dylan Gabriel and only 3 explosive passes. So really, really good stuff. Obviously, not quite enough, but that defense did, frankly, plenty in this game. But how Oregon was able to get the win, the defense really finished this game in a lot of different ways. Multiple chances were given to the Wisconsin offense, and after a failed field goal even, they weren't able to get it done. They allowed 0 yards in the fourth quarter to Wisconsin, and were able to get that pick at the end from Mateo Uiagalelei. So really remarkable stuff from a defense that has been really good all year. I don't think they've outright won a game for them. They were able to do it in this one. So absolutely huge, and definitely gives you a good idea of just how good this team is and how complete they are on a number of different phases. But then you got the run game kind of picking up the slack. The pass game just didn't get going the way the Oregon pass game normally does. They avoided those big disastrous plays other than the pick from Dylan Gabriel early in the game, but Jordan James getting 121 and 25 carries on the ground was huge. It wasn't necessarily the best game on the ground by any means, but it definitely was one where you just keep the chains moving, you make things tough for this defense, and at some point they were able to break through. So it was a huge game where a lot of things went wrong in the offensive side of the ball in particular, and you were able to get through it. That's something that pretty much every championship team has to do at some point. And then composure, another thing that every championship team has at some point throughout the season. You're down 7 going into the fourth quarter. You get 2 long scoring drives. You play incredibly defensively, and you get a huge win. That's one of those things that obviously it is Wisconsin. It's not necessarily the biggest test they've had on their schedule, but it definitely is a win that they very badly needed. It definitely is a win that puts them in a really good position going forward, and it is a win that, at the very least, keeps them undefeated when a couple other teams fell off this past weekend. But where do they go from here? I think for Wisconsin, it's been a frustrating year, no doubt about that. I think you've beaten all the teams that you were meant to beat. You've lost all the teams that you were meant to lose to, and I can't imagine that's the way that Wisconsin thought this year was going to go. I think they thought that they were going to play a little bit better football, maybe get a win here or there that are going to be massive, whether it was Penn State at home or this one or maybe Ohio State. I feel like they felt like they were going to get one of them. They weren't quite able to. Now, wins over Nebraska, I believe they have Minnesota to finish. If they get those two, I think you got to feel really good. Obviously, 7-5 is not quite where you saw yourself going this year, but a lot of really tough losses, including that Penn State game and this game, and I think there's still a lot of juice around that program. They need to do a lot of things in the offseason to get that thing rolling, but this was a good prove-it spot just to prove that you're still moving in the right direction, at the very least. For Oregon, they get a much-needed bye week this upcoming weekend, so they get a little bit of time, and then they play a game that they don't need to win, but they very badly need to win. They have Washington at the end of the year, and especially after what happened last season, they're going to very badly want that. They are already in the Big Ten title, so nothing to worry about there, but barring anything crazy, they will be in the CFP one way or the other, whether that's as the team that gets the bye or as the team that's getting one of those home games at the end of the year. But they very badly want to win that Washington game, I can promise you that. But moving forward to Texas, Texas has become one of the more confusing teams in college football. They have the makings of an elite team. They put it together every now and then, including last week against Florida, but they just haven't quite been able to go over the ledge, really make those big-time plays down the stretch of a game to give them the win that they very badly needed. Now, they were able to do it in this one. It wasn't necessarily perfect by any means, and they got some things to figure out offensively, particularly when they play what is dubbed as a flyover defense, essentially playing three safeties really deep. They haven't been able to get it done. Even in running the ball, they haven't been able to get it done, and they're going to have to, one way or the other. They're going to have to get this run game going, and they're going to have to be able to pull guys in, because if they can't hit the big plays that make that team so special. They can't make the big plays that really change a game for them. But for all that bad stuff, for all the stuff that happened offensively that weren't perfect, the defense, like they've been all year, was downright incredible. 6 sacks on the day, multiple turnovers forced again, 9 tackles for loss. They were flying around. Jahdae Barron, in my opinion, locked up the Jim Thorpe on Saturday, and I think a lot of things went right for this Texas defense. But all of the different things that went wrong offensively, all of the different things that went awry and didn't necessarily go the way you wanted it to, they made a number of huge plays down the stretch of this game. They had 2 big-time drives, one that was all the way down the field, I believe 8 plays, 75 yards, and they were able to get the score on a perfect pass from Quinn Ewers that was really a perfect drive in a number of different ways. And then in the last drive, they went almost 7 minutes to drown the clock, win this game, and get out with a 10-point win. It was ugly, no doubt about that, but they were able to get it done, and winning on the road in the SEC, never an easy thing to do. But this is a team that has a really high floor, in my opinion, with the defense that they play, with the way that they're able to spread teams out. They absolutely can win a number of games not playing all that great of football like they did on Saturday. But they also have an incredibly high ceiling. They're playing a little bit closer to the floor right now. This offense not necessarily picking it up the way that they would want it to has kept them from doing what they can do in this offense and what they can do overall as a team. So this offense needs to find a run game. They need to find those deep balls, and if they can't, then it could just be one of those teams that finds their way to the SEC championship, loses to Bama, and then they're getting debated on Selection Sunday. But how they got this win, an elite defensive performance. I mean, it was absolutely remarkable to watch this Texas team go to work. I think it's the best defense in the country. Obviously, haven't played those high-powered offenses that a couple others have played, so a little bit, on the fence about that, but still playing really elite football. 6 sacks, an INT, a huge forced fumble from Alfred Collins, and just constant pressure on Taylon Green in this one. A really dominant performance when they very badly needed it. The offense finished in a lot of different ways. You had Arkansas get within 3 points. Texas responded with an 8-play touchdown drive and then a 14-play drive that ate up 7 minutes of the end of the game. So absolutely huge for this team, where you play really bad offense for about 3.5 quarters, but you finish when you need to, and that's absolutely huge for this team going forward. Then you contain Taylon Green. It's very, very hard to do that. A lot of teams have really struggled with his legs, but he only had -4 yards on 16 carries, including sacks, of course, but that took the run game pretty much entirely out of this game. Only 2.4 yards per carry for Arkansas, where that had kind of been the thing that they did. That was their bread and butter, and Texas was able to totally knock it down. But where do they go from here? I think for Arkansas, they're relatively hard to judge. This entire season has been hard to judge. They played A&M and Texas tough. They were able to beat Tennessee at home, and then they got blown out by LSU and Ole Miss. So it's really, really hard to figure out how good this team is or how successful this season was. They have Louisiana Tech and Missouri to finish. could be a really strong finish. If they finish with those 2 wins, I'd feel pretty good about this team going forward. I said last week, I believe, that I think Sam Pittman might just get the axe at the end of the year. Feeling a little bit better about that right now. I don't necessarily know anything one way or the other, and I still think it's very much up for debate, but I think he'll probably stick around for 2025. And then for Texas, this is a huge one to get. It was very, very close to slipping away, but made some huge plays down the stretch to win that game. You got Kentucky, and then that A&M game that could be for the SEC championship, could be for a CFP berth, could be for everything. And it would be 14 years since 13 years, since we've been able to see that. So cannot wait. It's going to be incredible to watch that one, but those 2 teams got to handle business before we get there. But a couple of games where it could have gotten absolutely crazy this past weekend if either of those games went the other direction, but Oregon and Texas were able to handle business. They were able to move forward and get a big-time win, but we'll take our second break here. When we come back, we got big conference wins all around the country. South Carolina, Clemson, as well as Arizona State, all got wins that keep them in the CFP hunt, still got some ground to make up, but definitely big-time wins and keeps them at least in the hunt for a CFP spot. But we'll break it down right after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some big-time games where Oregon and Texas kind of just escaped a little bit this past weekend. Definitely wins that you're going to need at some point throughout the year, and they were able to get them at least avoid disaster and continue on their way to a possible CFP berth. But we got to get into a couple other teams that at least kept their hopes alive. I still think they have a little bit of work to do and need a little bit of help from different places throughout the next couple of weeks if they want to make a little bit of a run into the CFP, but they kept their hopes alive. At the very least, they kept their hopes alive, and we'll start with that big-time game down there in Columbia, South Carolina. What a finish this was. This was absolutely crazy. South Carolina was able to steal a game after a just ridiculous play from Luther Burden down the sideline, who should be getting just force-fed the ball, and he's not quite getting that from Missouri, but at the end of the day, he made a huge play, but South Carolina came back down. They made a incredible drive down the stretch of that game. Under a minute, we're able to go all the way down the field. And Lenore Sellers, not enough can be said about this guy. He's become one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC throughout this season. He was remarkably efficient in this game and really has been for the last 4 or 5 weeks. Has been really, really good. And Dowell Loggins with this offense has done an incredible job. I mean, it's been absolutely awesome to watch him after a hire that I thought was a little bit interesting, a little bit different than a lot of them out there. He was able to get it done. He's been absolutely incredible this year and seems to be a rising star in this industry. But Lenore Sellers, 21 for 30, 398 total, 5 touchdowns and 1 pick. That's about as good as you can possibly ask for, especially in that type of game. And then Missouri does deserve a little bit of respect here. I did pick against them against the spread. They're a very different team with Brady Cook on the field. I didn't expect him to be on the field, but at the end of the day, he wasn't perfect, but he made plenty of plays. And Nate Noel running the ball for 150. There were plenty there for the offense for Missouri in this game, where that's been kind of the disappointing unit throughout the year, where you felt like that was going to be one of the most explosive, one of the most dangerous offenses in the entire SEC. Hasn't quite been that throughout the year, and wasn't quite that in this game, but we're able to get a little bit of spark with Brady Cook being in there instead of Drew Pine. But the final 10 minutes of this game were insane. They were 4 touchdowns on 4 consecutive drives, and then the INT that finally ended it. But the final drive from South Carolina, was a hot knife through butter. They absolutely rolled through that Missouri defense, and it was capped by a beautiful play call, and then Rocket Sanders just running through people for a touchdown and giving them the final lead that they did not get rid of. But this is a huge win for South Carolina. I've been pretty clear. I don't think they have a real shot at the CFP. I think there's way too many teams in front of them, and I think that could be added to if A&M were to beat Texas at the end of the year. But overall, they've done a remarkable job gaining steam towards the end of 2024. If they were to blow out Clemson and a number of other things were to drop their way, they'd probably be the first 3-loss team that would be considered. I don't think they're going to be considered, but it can't be overstated how much this could mean going into 2025. It's obviously not if you got one play back in that LSU game, you're probably right in the mix. But at the end of the day, still a lot of things going right for this program, and 2025 could be huge for them. But a great win for South Carolina. Fully clears Missouri out of the conversation for the CFP and the SEC, so feels like we're down to those 6 teams, where it's Texas, UGA, Ole Miss, Bama, Texas A&M, and Tennessee. Those feel like the teams that still have a shot, whether or not it's 4 or 5 or however many. I don't know, but at the end of the day, it's going to be really interesting to watch what happens the rest of the way. Where do they go from here? I think for South Carolina, there's so much to like about this team, especially as you head into 2025. You have a win, you likely have a win over Wofford, and then you have a huge one against Clemson. If you can get those 2 wins, you end the season 9-3, and you have an argument to be made that if one call goes differently, you'd be right in the CFP. So this is a great team. This is one of those teams that in 2025 I expect to be a really interesting pick to win the SEC, but as of right now, probably not going to be able to make a run into the CFP just because of a couple of different things that have happened throughout the year, but a really good team, and Shane Beamer deserves a ton of respect for what he's done around there. And then for Missouri, I think this one hurts. There's no doubt about that. You felt like you might have had that shot. You made that huge play down the stretch of that game and felt like you might have gotten into the CFP. Felt like you might have kept those hopes alive, but then they come right back down, and they're able to kind of bury you. Still a program that has a lot of great things, but 2025 is becoming bigger and bigger for this Missouri team as they head forward under the Eli Drinkwitz era. But moving forward to the ACC, Clemson got a good win in a remarkable finish. Another game where it felt like Pitt might have won the game on a big-time score at the end of it, and then Cade Klubnik makes a huge play with his legs and puts Clemson right back up. And it really reminded me of that Trevor Lawrence play in the CFP a couple of years back at Clemson, because that boy was scooting. He was doing a little bit more than I thought he was capable of on that one. But huge shout out to Nate Yarnell in this one. He played far from perfect, but the run game really struggled. He was forced to throw the ball 54 times, and he gave him a really good shot to win. It was one of those games where a lot of different things kind of went wrong for Pitt throughout it, but Nate Yarnell just kept giving them shots to win it, especially at the very end. Gave him a really good shot to win it, and their defense just wasn't quite able to keep it up. But the magic of Pitt has come to an end. They were 7-0 a couple of weeks ago. Now they're 7-3, fully out of the conversation, and definitely hurts a little bit. I think it's a really good team and a program that could be heading forward into really promising things, especially with Eli Holstein under center. But at the end of the day, this is definitely a tough miss and one that they'd very much like to have back. But Cade Klubnik finished as the leading rusher for Clemson in this game, which is a huge amount of respect to the Pitt defense for bottling up Phil Maffa, because that is not an easy thing to do, but also Cade Klubnik for being able to take the initiative, say, I got to make a couple of plays with my legs, and he made the biggest one of the day, no doubt about that. But Antonio Williams has kind of become the pass guy for Clemson in this season. He's kind of become the receiver. Now, that's a more than fine thing. I think you can get to the ACC title. I think you can win that with him being the guy. I don't think you can win a playoff game if he's the only guy that's going to show up every week. And it's not to say that they don't have other talented guys. These freshmen are absolutely for real, and in 2025, they're going to be a problem. But as of right now, you need more guys. You need Jake Burningstool to get involved. You need a couple more guys in. As that wraps up your ACC play, you got a little bit of time to figure it out. You have a pretty much of a layup game this upcoming weekend, and then obviously South Carolina to finish. So still a lot of things to go, and they're going to have to hope that Miami loses one more game. If they win out, then they will be out of the ACC game and obviously out of the CFP. But overall, this win gives them a shot, and that's really all you can ask for right around now. But the fun for Pitt has come to kind of a screeching halt, and you hate to see it. But if they're able to finish this season with back-to-back wins, I think you got to feel pretty good about what you got going into 2025. But for Clemson, it's just about handling business the rest of the way. It's not about anything special or doing anything different, just kind of handling what's in front of you. You lose to South Carolina. It won't really hurt you in the CFP race because the only way you're getting in is in the ACC championship, and that obviously wouldn't hurt their ACC record. But at the end of the day, not one you want to lose by any means, and would put this season in a really, really weird spot. But if you do lose that game and you miss out on the ACC championship, then some questions are being asked over there in Clemson. I can't doubt that. But as for Pitt, in a matter of 3 games, they went from undefeated in the ACC championship and CFP race to 3 losses and totally out of everything. But at the end of the day, it definitely does hurt, but Eli Holstein feels like a guy that is going to be huge for them down the stretch. And it feels like a guy that, going into 2025, could be one of the more talked about quarterbacks in the entire country. I think this is a program that's heading in the right direction. They obviously are going to have a couple more hurdles with Miami playing good, SMU, obviously, Clemson. They're going to have plenty of people they're going to have to get past if they want to win these games. But at the end of the day, you got to feel pretty good if you're Pitt going into 2025, especially with that quarterback that you have in Eli Holstein. And then Arizona State got a huge one, the one that Desmond Howard was not aware of being a big deal, but it definitely was over there in the Big 12. And Arizona State's kind of been overshadowed by BYU and by Colorado, but they've been as impressive as just about anyone. Kenny Dillingham has done an incredible job with this team. They've been able to win games that they just really shouldn't have won early on in the season, and then they were able to really round into form, and now they're really a well-oiled machine. They didn't do what they usually do in this game, which is run the football really well. I mean, Cam Scadaboo had less than 3 yards per carry. It was not pretty, but Sam Levitt really picked up the slack. 275 and 3 scores through the air. It's the place that you can really attack this Kansas State defense in. They really did, and it was really Jordan Tyson that led the efforts. It was 12 catches, 176 yards, 2 scores for him. He was really impressive, and they needed him bad in this game, and he showed up. But then the Arizona State defense really played well in this game. They forced 3 turnovers on the day, had 4 tackles for loss. Wasn't necessarily perfect, but they swarmed pretty good. They were really all over the place and kept this rush offense in particular kind of under wraps for a lot of the game. And they did a great job against the pass as well. They were really, really incredible in this game and could be huge as they have BYU coming into town this upcoming weekend. Going to be a huge one in the Big 12, and we'll talk about it later in the week. But Kansas State kind of missed the mark this year, just overall. Really from the start, they hadn't played their best football. They just hadn't quite done what they wanted to do, and this officially puts a period on their season. There's still technically a chaos scenario where they find their way in. I don't think they're going to find their way in. I'll leave it at that for the time being. But for Arizona State, you got BYU and Tempe next week. It's the biggest game of your season. It's the biggest game of your program for the last number of years. And if you can get it, then you're right in the Big 12 title. I know that sounds crazy, but Arizona State is still very much alive, and this one does a ton for this program. And I think where they go from here is just handle your business. You beat BYU, you beat Arizona, you are in the Big 12 championship, and you're either playing Colorado or maybe you're playing BYU again, or maybe you're playing Iowa State. We will get into all the craziness throughout the week, but definitely a team that is playing really good football, maybe as well as just about anyone in the Big 12, and could be a really, really fun game in the Big 12 championship if it's them against Colorado. But for Kansas State, really tough season overall, just one that kind of got away from them early on. They never really were able to get it back. I think with Avery Johnson going into 2025, you feel pretty confident. It's not necessarily perfect by any means, but a 9-3 season at Kansas State is something to be proud of, and definitely gives you a little bit of rolling downhill as you head into 2025. Not necessarily the season that they wanted. They very badly wanted to win this thing. There's no doubt about that. But at the end of the day, you get to 9-3, you get at least in the conversation at the top of the Big 12, and you head into 2025, maybe get a couple of guys from the portal, you add and make this look a little bit better. They do have Kansas at the end of the year, so this thing could get a little bit worse, but at the end of the day, it's still a program that I think is still really talented. Kleiman is absolutely incredible as the head coach, and I think they're going to be fine. It's obviously not a great year, and I think not having Colin Klein on that sideline was a big deal with that. But overall, it's a season that got away from you just a little bit. For Arizona State, for Clemson, for South Carolina, you can still look at the CFP. I don't think that South Carolina is going to get there. Arizona State would need to win this upcoming weekend and then beat Arizona. Obviously, Clemson would need to get a little bit of help from Miami. But at the end of the day, still a lot of really teams that are looking at the CFP saying, we need a couple of things to bounce our way, but it can still happen. So it's going to be incredible to watch that unfold throughout the rest of the year, and definitely a couple of teams there, including especially Arizona State, in my opinion, that are going to be really fun to watch down the stretch. But let's take our third break here. And when we come back, we got to talk about the upsets. We got BYU going down as one of the undefeated teams. We had Florida's moment in the sun. Felt like a huge moment for that program, and I'll break it down at the end. And then we'll get into New Mexico as well as Stanford that got huge wins that clear up the CFP picture just a little bit. But we'll talk about it right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some big-time games in all of the conferences. South Carolina gets a huge win over Missouri. Clemson escapes over Pitt with a huge game from Cade Klubnik, and then Arizona State gets a win that very much keeps them in the Big 12 race that got a little bit crazy this past weekend, and BYU was a huge reason. They finally went down this past weekend, and we'll start with that game, and then we'll get to a number of other upsets that happened throughout this weekend. But Kansas gets a huge win over BYU. They continue just the death march that they're on right about now to ruin everyone's hopes and dreams in the Big 12. They got Colorado next week, and they still can do that. It's going to be absolutely incredible to watch that team, but overall, it was a quarterback punt that brought the magic to an end for BYU. A lot of the stuff that had bounced the way of BYU throughout this year bounced against them yesterday. The magic was not for them was not for them on Saturday, and definitely a loss that really it hurts. It puts them in a really tough spot going forward. Technically, if they win out, they're more than fine. They're still in the Big 12 championship. They still have a shot to go to the CFP. It definitely does take out any chance of them getting in as an at-large bid. They're not going to lose in the Big 12 championship and still be able to get in with 2 losses. Feel pretty confident in saying that. But this was the ugliest performance of the year for BYU, no doubt about that. I think Kansas really stepped up every time they needed to, including the final drive to get that final stop. Was definitely a moment where you felt like BYU was still going to be able to pull through. Kansas was able to respond. They got 2 forced turnovers, tons of pressure, no runs over 14 yards, which is huge against a BYU team that has been able to really stretch some teams with their run game. Kansas was able to really bottle that in. It's absolutely huge for this team, and I think unlike so many other things for Kansas and unlike so many other games for Kansas this year, this was won by the defense. The run game with Devin Neal did enough in this game, but at the end of the day, the defense really won this game. They were all over the place. They made a number of plays against a BYU offense that hadn't been perfect. Definitely had a couple of things go their way, had taken advantage of turnovers and things of that nature, but was still a very good group. Was still a group that was hard to kind of get a track of, hard to kind of bottle in, and they were able to do it. But for BYU, it's just about getting back on track. Obviously, you have a huge one this upcoming weekend in Tempe, so you got to fix a lot of things and get right. But at the end of the day, you went out the rest of the way. You're in the Big 12 championship playing for a spot in the CFP. This is a tough loss, but doesn't do much of anything to hurt BYU in a lot of different ways. Now, where do they go from here is a big-time question, but we'll start with Kansas here. They're going just trying to wreck everyone's season. That's their job the rest of the way. They get Colorado and Lawrence at this upcoming weekend, and then they get Kansas State at the end of the year. They'd love to finish this with 2 more wins, knock Colorado out, make Kansas State season just a little bit worse, and add another twist to this Big 12 schedule. They are more than capable of doing that. We will break down that game later in the week, but this team with a lot of juice right about now. They are doing incredible things offensively, and the defense feels like it's starting to come along. Could be a really tough group for Colorado to beat on the road, but again, we will break that down a little bit later in the week. For BYU, the good news is you had a buffer. You had one. That's what you get to afford, especially when you go undefeated this deep into the season. But now you go to Tempe and you need a win over Arizona State. It's going to be tough. It's a really, really good team right now. You lose and you're likely out of the race 2 weeks after being undefeated and firmly in it. So a very, very interesting spot for BYU to be in after being undefeated. They now got a must-win this upcoming weekend. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this team the rest of the way. But a huge win for Kansas and one that puts BYU's season in a weird place going forward at the very least. Then you got LSU, Florida. What a performance from Florida. And it's one that these Florida fans needed really, really badly. It was the reason that DJ Lagway was able to keep Billy Napier around. He is that good. He is absolutely incredible. He showed it on Saturday, and he made a number of plays that are just outright ridiculous. That final throw to Elijah Badger, that doesn't happen with normal guys. I don't know how many guys in the country, really, that can make that throw. Stepping up in the pocket away from Braden Swinson, both feet actually off the ground when he made the throw, and he puts it on a dime from 45 yards. It was absolutely incredible, and one of those guys that he didn't play perfect. He actually almost threw a pick earlier in that drive, but but he was able to make the plays when it mattered. He was able to make the big-time plays down the stretch, and overall, it was incredible that he was able to, because the stat sheet in this one is outright insane. LSU ran 49 more plays, 92-43 for Florida. They won the time of possession by more than 23 minutes, 41-43 to 18-87 for Florida in this game. LSU only gained 43 more yards, and they scored 11 less points. So gives you an idea of how efficient this Florida offense was and how inefficient the LSU offense was. I mean, they got 6 points on 3 drives that totaled over 22 minutes in the second half. That's more than Florida had the entire game. So gives you an idea of how good this Florida defense was throughout the day, and gives you an idea of just why Billy Napier stuck around. I know this team is not perfect by any means. I know that Texas game was a really tough way to get that news and then have that one come right after it, but they kept DJ Lagway out of that game for this one. They kept a lot of guys out of that game for this one, including Elijah Badger, I think. So this was a huge game. There's no two ways about that. If they were to lose this one, then some questions would start to be mounting, but they needed one of these wins. They were able to get it. Now you got Ole Miss coming in. Now you got another chance to possibly shock the world, possibly get another win, knock Ole Miss out of the CFP, and make things really interesting in the SEC. But overall, you're able to get the win. You have one coming up against Florida State at the end of the year. You should be able to go to a bowl game after all this. But overall, I think they just needed this one. I think everyone in that crowd, I think every one of those players, I think Billy Napier especially, needed this one to go through the net. They needed this win. They needed to be able to look up at the end of the game and get a win over LSU. It's a lot of momentum around that program right now. We've already seen Trammell Jones Jr., an elite quarterback, commit to them in the recruiting world. Jamie French, a Texas committed wide receiver, is starting to talk about it, and he's saying that DJ Lagway is the reason that they still have a shot. So gives you an idea of why everything happened around Florida the way that it did. And moving forward, for LSU, I don't know. I'll be totally honest. They just reset their defensive staff. That cost them a pretty penny this past offseason. They have an elite quarterback commit coming in Bryce Underwood. So I think Brian Kelly's safe. There's still going to be a lot of questions from fans and boosters, and are they happy about Brian Kelly staying? I don't know. But at the end of the day, I do think he's safe. If Bryce Underwood decommits, then maybe things change in a hurry. But as of right now, I think he's safe for the time being. We'll see what happens down the stretch, but definitely something to watch in Baton Rouge. For Florida, this was the moment. It was the moment that you needed pretty much all year, and you weren't quite able to get over the hump. You were able to do it in this one. This was a huge, huge spot, and I think it's one of those teams that a lot going right as you head into 2025. It could all come to a crashing halt in 2025 if it doesn't go the way that you want it to, but at the end of the day, this is a huge moment and cannot be overstated how huge this was for Billy Napier moving forward, and maybe that recruiting really takes off and they become a really dangerous team heading into 2025, especially with that guy under center. I'd be a little bit nervous if I was just about anyone else in the SEC. But another huge game that kind of knocked one of the fringe CFP teams, let's just put it that way, out of the contest. New Mexico gets a huge win over Washington State, 38-35, and this one over/under was set at 72.5. Barely got there, and the quarterbacks put on a show on the way there. John Mateer had 25 for 36, 375, and 4 touchdowns passing, 9 carries, 65 yards, and a 1 rushing touchdown. Was absolutely incredible. And then Damon Dampier had 11 for 25, 174, and 1 passing touchdown, 28 carries, 193 yards, and 3 scores on the ground. He was absolutely incredible. This run game for New Mexico in general was absolutely incredible in this game, and the New Mexico defense does deserve some credit. Was not playing well at all, really, at halftime, and then they were down by 14 for 4 straight punts from the Washington State offense, and their team was able to make a 17-0 run and take the lead in this game. And although Washington State was able to take the lead again, New Mexico was able to come back down. Was absolutely a huge performance from this defense really for much of the second half to kind of shut down this offense for Washington State and give their team at least a shot to move forward. But for Washington State, that puts them in a really tough spot moving forward. They're obviously not going to go to the CFP. They probably weren't anyway, if I'm being totally honest, but obviously this officially knocks them out. I think moving forward, New Mexico is still a team that's playing for the postseason. They have a bye this week, and then it's Hawaii to finish it off. If they're able to get a win there, then they're heading to a bowl game, and that's a year where it didn't go perfectly by any means, but you got a big-time win here and there. You got to 6 wins. You got to a bowl game. Not much more you can ask for from that New Mexico group. Wasn't a perfect year, but definitely one that gives you a lot of hope, and Dampier is going to be a guy to watch in the portal. I'll just leave it at that for the time being. Definitely a guy to watch that could be picked up by an elite team this offseason. And then for Washington State, the crazy scenario does come to an end. It was a really fun run from John Mateer and the boys, and if they're able to top Oregon State, who should be able to top them because they got shut out by Air Force this past weekend, and then Wyoming to finish, which they should, 10-2, which would be absolutely huge for this team, especially as you get into this kind of grand unknown after the Pac-12 disbanded. Being able to get a 10-2 season and at least have some momentum heading into 2025 is really big for this program. So cannot wait to see what they can do the rest of the way, and obviously what they can do in 2025 with John Mateer, or is he another name to watch in the portal during the offseason? And then another team that probably was in another crazy scenario, probably wasn't finding their way into the CFP, but is now officially eliminated, and it was a crazy finish. Stanford scored 10 points in the final 45 seconds of this game to get a win over Louisville, and some rather wild coaching and player decisions from Louisville's side that kind of aided them in that path. But at the end of the day, Stanford was able to get that game-winning field goal, and Ashton Daniels probably played his best game in a while with over 300 yards and 3 passing touchdowns. He was really impressive, and a lot of that stuff from the pass game went to Emmett Mosley when the run game was just not really working. It was pretty much non-existent in this game. Emmett Mosley went for 168 through the air, 3 touchdowns. He was plenty offensively. It was absolutely incredible. Alec Ayo-Minor made a number of big-time plays as well. So this past game picked up the slack where this run game was just very much struggling on Saturday. And Tyler Shuck and Louisville fall short of the ACC title. It was probably not going to happen, frankly, but that win over Clemson kept them in the fight a little bit and definitely would have been interesting down the stretch of the season. Now, they can finish 9-3. It could become 7-5 in a hurry. They got some tough teams coming up that we'll talk about here in a second, but they clears up the ACC just a little bit. You have those 3 teams up top. Those are the only 3 that are going to really challenge for the ACC title, and it's really, does Miami lose the rest of the way, or do they run the rest of the table? Or does SMU lose the next 2 games, or do they win at least one of them? So you're probably in pretty good shape in the SEC, or ACC, excuse me. You probably know where you're going from here on forward. We'll see what happens with Miami, but it's those 3 teams and pretty much no one else at this very moment. But where do they go from here? I think for Stanford, this could be a huge one down the road. You always need one of these wins early on in your tenure. Troy Taylor has a lot of work to do around Stanford, no doubt about that, and this is going to be just a little bit of a step in the right direction at the very least. Still got many steps to go, but at the end of the day, this is a big-time win and definitely puts you at least on a good path to finish out this season. And then you got Louisville. This one hurts. There's no doubt about that. You had a chance to get a big-time win, move on to the ACC champion, or move on at least to give yourself a shot at the ACC championship, but you lose, you let them score 10 points in the final 45 seconds, everything kind of crumbles, and then you got Pitt and Kentucky waiting the rest of the way. Not necessarily layup games. Now, Kentucky should be a little bit easier. Pitt, I don't know what's going on with Eli Holstein if he's going to play in that game, but you got to get those wins. If you lose even one of those games, you're 8-4 after being a team that could have challenged for the CFP, and there's a lot of disappointment in that fan base. I can promise you that. But it's going to be interesting to watch those teams the rest of the way, and really, it's going to be really interesting to watch BYU. See what they do, see if they're able to bounce back at Arizona State. If they lose, that could go from an undefeated season to totally out of the Big 12 race in a hurry. It's going to be interesting to watch that, but let's take our last break here. When we come back, we just got to do a little bit of a whip around of all the other top 25 games, as well as a big-time game in the Big 12 that kept a team in the race a little bit. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the upsets from this past weekend. BYU finally goes down on the year after avoiding a couple of run-ins, no doubt about that. And then Florida gets their moment in the sun. Anthony said it on the money. I was absolutely wrong as well. There's no doubt about that. I think a lot of people were wrong about Billy Napier this year, and he was able to get a lot out of this team. The last couple of weeks could not be more impressed, really, with what he's been able to do in the back half of the season, where would have been very easy for this team to quit. They were able to keep their wits about them, probably going to get to a bowl game, and we'll see what happens from there. But definitely a program that's heading in the right direction, and they might feel pretty good that they held on to Billy Napier this time next year. But obviously, still a ton of stuff to happen around there, including the recruiting world that is really heating up for Florida right about now. But let's get into this whip around, and we'll start with that number 2 team in the country. Ohio State gets a little bit of a slow start from them, but at the end of the day, they were able to get this win, not look back after that. Carnell Tate made a couple of huge, big-time touchdown catches. This one, you couldn't necessarily see on the broadcast all that well, but at the end of the day, he did make the catch, got 2 touchdowns in this game, was absolutely huge for this, and it was a Chicago native. So really, really cool moment for him, no doubt about that, playing in probably the stadium that he went to a number of times during his youth in Wrigley over there. But for Will Howard, went for nearly 250 in this game, 2 scores through the air. Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson got over 70 yards rushing. Jeremiah Smith was Jeremiah Smith, had 100 yards receiving. Did get dinged up late in this game, so something to watch as we head into the next week, but should be fine. He's an absolute freak, so I'm just going to assume that he's fine going forward, if I'm being totally honest. But another clean game for Ohio State as they head into the huge one this weekend against Indiana. Another great confidence boost, and if they get this one this weekend, they will be in Indy and playing that team that beat them earlier in the season, looking for that number 1 spot in the country. And then you got Penn State. They were able to handle business in what has become kind of a pseudo bye week in the Big Ten. No disrespect to Purdue, but no one's really had to sweat too much when they've played Purdue throughout this year, but Penn State continues to handle business. Drew Aller had more passing touchdowns with 3 than he had incompletions in this game. Was really, really impressive, and it was all around the guy, and Tyler Warren. He was absolutely incredible, leading receiver because he always is, so of course he is, but leading rusher as well in this game. Had 190 total yards, 2 scores, 1 rushing and 1 receiving. He and Harold Fannin, it's battle for that Mackey Award. I do think it's going to be Tyler Warren because of the contest, or because of the competition, because of the versatility, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a really, really fun race, and those 2 tight ends are downright special. No 2 ways about that. But Penn State, you're 2 wins away from the CFP. You got to be very careful, because I think you lose one of these games and you are outright out. I think especially with the logjam that's happening in the SEC, if they lose one more game, they are not going to get into the CFP. Now, they have at Minnesota and then Maryland. They should be able to handle business. If they are able to handle business, I expect them to host a playoff game. And as we saw on Saturday with those Tennessee receivers, you get one of those SEC teams all the way up north, it could be a huge advantage for you. But at the end of the day, got to handle business. If they lose one more, I think they are officially out of the CFP. I have very few doubts about that, honestly. And then Notre Dame was able to get a very comfortable win. This was one that was 35-0, and then Virginia was able to get a couple of scores at the end to make this look a little bit better. But at the end of the day, Notre Dame has been very impressive the last couple of weeks. Jeremiah Love kind of been leading the way there. He's been absolutely incredible, and one of those guys that if you're watching Notre Dame and you're not watching number 4, do yourself a favor and watch number 4. He's absolutely incredible no matter what he's doing on that field. He's a really, really good player, and he's going to be back next year. He could be a Doak Walker Award type guy next year. But this defense is incredible. It's one of the best in the entire country, especially in pass defense. Forced 3 turnovers from Anthony Coulandry in this game, and they were just all over the place. I mean, I think it's one of those things that while I don't think this team is necessarily elite, I don't necessarily think this team is going to win a CFP game. If you were to host a CFP game and have that defense on the other side, you're going to have a really good shot. You're going to have a shot against just about anyone in the country. So it's a team that I don't think is perfect by any means. They were able to lose to NIU and still find their way into the race probably. But at the end of the day, I do think they're playing really good football, and that defense could get them a long way. And now it's the Army game. It's the game that a lot of people have been looking forward to throughout the year, including myself. Going to be really interesting to watch what happens in that one. Then you got to go to LA to play USC, which is a team that got a huge win this past weekend and could have a little bit of momentum by the time you go visit them. Obviously going to be a huge couple of games, and if they lose, they're absolutely out. There's no doubt about that. Got to keep their wits about them. Got to get these next 2 wins in probably the 2 toughest games they've played since that A&M game, honestly. And then Boise State, they got a 21-point win, but it was not a 21-point win, if you know what I mean. This was not necessarily as pretty as Boise State, as the scoreboard might indicate, but they scored a touchdown, followed shortly by a pick six to really open this thing up. But Ashton Jeanty had another sleeper of a game. Only 159 yards and 3 scores for Ashton Jeanty in this one. Absolutely crazy. One of those things that it's insane what this kid is doing right now. And it's insane how many times this defense just decided we're going to stop him. We're going to try to stop number 2, and they still weren't able to do that. I do have a proposal for the Heisman that I'll reveal when I get to the Colorado game. I think it's worth looking at. This has been a very weird year, but I think Ashton Jeanty and Travis Hunter should be there alone. I'll get into that here in a second. But Boise State stays on track. They're still in the G5 hunt. I have a take about the G5 that I'll get to in a little bit here, but they have Wyoming and Oregon State to finish, and then the possible Mountain West Championship. If they win out the rest of the way, barring, an Army win this weekend, I think they're probably in. Now, maybe an Army win still gets them in because it clears out Notre Dame. Maybe they take Notre Dame's spot instead of a Tennessee or someone like that. I'd be a little bit surprised, but who knows? Still a lot of stuff ahead for Boise State, and still could get one of those byes with how the Big 12 is shaking out right about now. And then Boston College. This was another game that was a little bit closer than it looks like on that scoreboard because SMU scored with less than 10 seconds on the board to go up by 10 and make this one look a little bit better, but they get the win. They stay undefeated in the ACC. Grayson James did mostly a good job jumping into that starting role after a really weird week around Boston College overall, but nearly 250 total yards, 2 scores, did have an INT, but at the end of the day, on the road on your first start in elite college football, it's pretty good stuff, and probably should have been plenty for them to win this game, but Kevin Jennings had another great game, 300 yards passing, 3 scores on the day. They have at Virginia and then Cal to finish. They win this weekend. It would send them to the ACC Championship in their very first year. Would not be the best thing for a lot of other ACC teams out there, but at the end of the day, a huge performance from them and definitely puts them on the inside track as they head towards that ACC Championship. Could be a huge, huge game and definitely one that opens up a lot of things for this SMU program as they head forward. And then we got this one. I think Travis Hunter won the Heisman on Saturday. I don't necessarily think he should have, but he did. It feels like he did at the very least. His odds, I believe, are minus 330 on FanDuel right now, so they feel pretty good that this is going to be the guy. He had 5 catches, 55 yards, 1 INT, and a crazy rushing touchdown that I don't even know how he did it, but at the end of the day, he's remarkable, and he's probably going to be your Heisman at the end of the year. My proposal for the Heisman, I will get to it now. Just send Travis Hunter and Ashton Jeanty. I understand that there are a couple other guys. Cam Ward's played really good football, and he deserves some love. I'm not necessarily saying he doesn't. He'll get that at the Davey O'Brien Award. I think some other guys deserve some love, and they will get that at their own individual position award. Let those 2 guys go to New York. Those 2 guys have been far and away the best players in college football this year. Travis Hunter has done things that we have never seen. Ashton Jeanty has done things we haven't seen since Barry Sanders. Send those 2 guys, tell their 2 stories, let them be alone in New York. That sounds crazy, and I'm sure there will be more guys. I'm sure Dylan Gabriel will get the invite. I bet Cam Ward will get the invite. And I'm not necessarily saying that they're totally unworthy of getting those invites. I just think these 2 guys have set themselves so far apart from everyone else that I think we should just celebrate them. Just send those 2, let those 2 be the representatives in New York, and let that be it. They're going to be the 2 that are actually competing for the thing, so might as well just send those 2 and tell their stories. But it's going to be interesting to watch that unfold. I think Travis Hunter has won the Heisman pretty much as long as he handles business, doesn't have anything crazy happen with Ashton Jeanty. I think he's won the Heisman. But I think they should just send those 2 and call it a day. But we'll see what happens. I can't imagine that will happen, but would love to see it. And then I think for this game, they were able to handle a little bit of a scare to start this one. They had an INT on the very first play and had a little bit of a slow start, but they were dominant the rest of the way. They were able to get a step closer to that Big 12 title, a step closer to the CFP. The game wreckers are coming in. Kansas is on deck for the Buffs, and it's going to be a really tough game. They're on the road. It's going to be one of those things where they cannot afford a loss because the tiebreakers do not go their direction by any means. So pretty much if they lose this weekend, they will be objectively out. If they win this weekend, they only got Oklahoma State left between them and a Big 12 title, and whoever they meet there, whether it's BYU or Iowa State or Arizona State, they will definitely be the favorite team and definitely be a team that has a path to the CFP. As crazy as that sounds, I mean, if you told me that in August, I would have called you crazy. But at the end of the day, Deion has done an incredible job, and Colorado gets a comfortable win. Now you just got to handle the team that not a lot of teams in your conference have been able to handle in Kansas next week. And then we had a huge game. Let's get back to my Group of 5 take that I talked about with Boise State. This is the best team in Group of 5. Tulane is the best team in the Group of 5. They've lost 2 games to Oklahoma and Kansas State early in the year, 2 games that they fought a lot harder in than people realize, but I think you give them a shot even if Boise State goes 12-1. I think if this team wins out the rest of the way, they're 11-2 with wins over Navy, with wins over Army, with a win over Memphis, I think they deserve some love. I genuinely, I don't even care if Boise State goes 12-1. I think this is the best team in the Group of 5, and regardless of the record, should be getting some respect for the CFP. I think it's going to be hard at 11-2 if Boise State's 12-1, but I think they deserve some more love. I'll leave it at that for the time being. But Navy's leading rusher in this game, 31 yards. That is not normal for this Navy offense. They average less than 3 yards per carry, completed 3 passes for 13 yards, and threw a pick. This Tulane defense was absolutely incredible and is probably one of the better units in the entire Group of 5. Really, really good and did a great job against this run game. The American title has been set. The first conference championship that has been set around the country, Tulane versus Army, is going to be one. Home field is still yet to be decided based on the next couple of performances for those teams, but if Army wins and Boise State loses once more, they should be in that CFP, in that G5 CFP spot. If Tulane wins and Boise State loses once more, they should be in that spot. Now, if Army wins this weekend and wins out the rest of the way, regardless of what Boise State does, they should be in. But it's going to be interesting to watch that one, and definitely a game that is absolutely huge for both these teams. Could send one of these teams to the CFP. And then finally, Iowa State stays in the fight for the Big 12. They win a dogfight in the first half and then dominant in the second half for Iowa State. Really, really good stuff from the Cyclones and gets back on track after 2 back-to-back losses. They're still in the hunt. I know that sounds crazy, but at Utah and then Kansas State left, they win both. They're in a really, really good spot. Now, they would need a little bit of help from, I believe, Arizona State this weekend. I think if Arizona State wins this weekend and then Iowa State runs out the rest of the way, it would be Iowa State, Colorado. I could be a little bit wrong there, a little bit off. I do think that's the outcome. And then if Colorado loses, the door opens even a little bit more. So despite back-to-back losses, they are still in the hunt for the Big 12, as crazy as that sounds. So a huge win for Iowa State and definitely one that they very badly need to just get the season back on track one way or the other. But overall, a crazy weekend. There's no two ways about that. We had a couple of upsets. We had a couple of teams avoid some upsets. We had a couple of teams get some huge wins, including Georgia. That huge win over Tennessee was definitely the headline of the weekend. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports that you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow to break down some of the crazy CFP scenarios in front of us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.